SOF Convergence, Classified Doctrinal Briefing, Why Ranger School Black Budget Genesis. Location, Pentagon, SCIF-4, B, Clearance, Eyes Only, Omega Black, Audience, CIA Special Activities Center, JSOC Representatives, Ranger Training Brigade Command, Program Genesis Oversight Cell. Time, 0300 hours, Washington, D.C. No banners, no uniforms, just concrete walls, a long table, and a silence thick enough to press against the chest. The wolves were not present. They were never meant to be. This briefing was not for weapons. It was for the men who would decide whether those weapons would ever be trusted. A projector hummed. A single slide appeared. Why not a bespoke pipeline? The question had been asked a dozen times already by men who had built elite units from scratch before. Delta, DevGru, ISA. Units born in secrecy, trained in isolation, accountable only to God and the President. So why not now? Why force them? Genetically engineered, magically resilient, biologically superior, through a school designed to break human beings? A civilian analyst spoke first. CIA, no insignia. Because bespoke pipelines lie, he said calmly. They tell you what you want to hear. The slide changed. Footage, helmet cam, grainy, night, human operators pinned down in jungle terrain, screaming, muzzle flashes. Then, nothing. Static. A red overlay. Mission failure. Asset lost. Another clip. Desert. Thermal. Shapes moving too fast. Human silhouettes falling behind. Another red overlay. Then another. A general leaned forward, fingers steepled. These are asymmetric losses, he said. Terrain, endurance, tracking failures. Yes, sir, the analyst replied. And every time the after-action report blamed environment, not leadership. The room stayed quiet. A 4-star general cleared his throat. Let's be precise, he said. We are not here to debate whether the unit works. No one disagreed. No one needed to. The Syrian footage had already done that. Infrared ghosts moving where men couldn't. Thermal signatures disappearing into rock. A compound erased without air support. A senator's daughter alive when probability said she shouldn't be. The CIA representative, civilian suit, military posture, tapped a finger against a classified folder. They're operational, he said. The question is what happens next. Silence answered him. Then a ranger colonel spoke, a man who had worn the tab for decades. Ranger school doesn't test skills, he said. It tests whether someone can lead when everything else is gone. He looked around the room. You want to know if your wolves are special? Don't train them differently. Train them the same. The slide changed again. Core problem identified. Superior assets fail when doctrine collapses. Another voice joined in. JSOC. Low, clipped. Every black program thinks it's above institutional friction. That's how you get units that can kill, but can't command. Assets that survive missions but leave disasters behind them. A pause. You want them trusted? Make them earn it the way everyone else did. The next slide carried a single line. Ranger School is a lie detector. A Marine general scoffed quietly. Explain. The Ranger colonel didn't look at him. Ranger School strips everything away, he said. Sleep, food, ego, rank. Biology won't save them. Healing won't save them. Strength won't save them. He finally turned. Only judgment does. The JSOC commander leaned forward, forearms on the table. His voice was flat, professional. You can't plug them into existing teams. Someone else started to object. He cut them off. Not because they're uncontrollable, because they're too controlled, in a way our doctrine doesn't account for. The screen flickered. A still image froze. 6 wolves moving in perfect stagger through broken terrain, no hand signals, no verbal comms. They don't communicate like us, he continued. They don't hesitate like us. And when things go bad, they don't fragment. A Marine general nodded slowly. You're saying interoperability degrades them. And us, the JSOU commander replied. Put them in a SEAL platoon, you slow them down. Put humans in their formation, you put lives at risk. Another voice, this one sharp. So what? Keep them in a cage? No one answered immediately. Then the oldest man in the room spoke. He had said very little all morning. You don't cage a thing like this, he said quietly. You decide whether you're willing to admit it exists. Another slide. No shifts, unless authorized. A murmur rippled through the room. The analyst raised a hand. This was not negotiable. He tapped the screen. Ranger School works because everyone is equal in misery. If the wolves shift freely, they are no longer students. They become exceptions. He let that settle. And exceptions are how programs rot. Someone finally asked the question that mattered. And if they wash out? The Ranger Colonel didn't hesitate. Then they were never weapons, he said. Just liabilities with fur. Silence again. They can't answer to a conventional chain, one general argued. Congress will never— They already did, the CIA man interrupted. By not asking questions. That landed. Another officer leaned back. If they're not integrated, then what are they? The oldest man smiled thinly. Standalone, he said. Like Devgru, like Delta. Except, he paused. They don't belong to a branch. The word branch lingered. So who owns them? Someone asked. No one, came the answer. That was when the room finally understood what they were authorizing. Another slide appeared. Directive. All Genesis assets will complete Ranger School. No modifications to standards. Failure results in program termination. Then the last line of the briefing appeared. If they can lead humans while starving, they can lead anyone anywhere. Hold up. If you enjoy the story, please consider leaving a like. It only takes a second. And while you're at it, why not subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon? It really helps the channel to grow, and you will be notified the moment a new video is dropped. Now back to the story. Far away, at a holding facility that did not exist on any map, 16 wolves waited. They did not know Ranger School awaited them. They did not know hunger would be weaponized against them. They did not know that for the first time since their creation, healing would not be enough. Only this was true. Everything they believed about themselves was about to be taken apart by an institution older than the program that built them. The heavy door slid aside with a hydraulic sigh. The wolves entered together. Not marching, not posturing. Simply present. For a brief moment, just a moment, the room's occupants felt it. The subtle wrongness. The sense that evolution had skipped a step and landed somewhere uncomfortable. Kael's gaze moved across the room. He catalogued faces, ranks, intent. He felt no fear. Only readiness. The 4-star stood. You know why you're here, Kael answered evenly. We assume we're being evaluated. The general studied him. You passed that evaluation in Syria. A beat. What happens now? Nyra asked. No challenge, just clarity. The CIA man spoke this time. You will not integrate with existing SOF units. Silence. You will train through them as humans. Brows furrowed, ears sharpened. You will extract doctrine, not identity, the man continued. Rangers, Force Recon, SEALs, Special Forces, Delta Oversight, Selective, Surgical. And command? Kael asked. You command yourselves, the JSOC commander said. until you fail. That answer mattered. Later, much later, when the room was empty again, the wolves stood alone. No applause, no ceremony, just the weight of what had been decided. "We're alone now," Nyra said softly. Kael nodded once. "We always were." "But now," Eloin added, flexing his shoulder where cold still lived in the bone. "It's official." Nyra smiled faintly, sharp as glass. "Good. I don't like borrowing other people's rules." Kael looked at each of them. "We will learn what they know," he said. "We will take what works. We will discard what doesn't." "And if they try to control us?" Yoren asked. Kael's eyes didn't change. "They already know better." They were no longer an experiment. They were a problem, deliberately unleashed. And the first training order was already waiting. Ranger doctrine, mountains, weight, endurance, no shifts allowed unless failure demands it. The wolves read it in silence. Then they moved. Darby phase. Arrival and the first lie. Fort Moore did not look like a place where legends were made. It looked like a place where people disappeared quietly. The buses rolled through the outer gate just before dawn, engines throttled low, headlights dark. Pine trees pressed close on either side of the road, their needles whispering against metal as if the installation itself were alive and listening. The air was heavy. Georgia humidity, thick with red clay, stagnant water, and decay. It settled into lungs and stayed there. Inside the buses sat 16 wolves, human-shaped, still, silent. They wore no unit insignia, no rank, no markers of what they had already endured. Their duffels rested between their boots, packed to a standardized weight that ignored muscle density, bone reinforcement, or accelerated healing. Every adjustment had been stripped out deliberately. Kael Vorn sat near the front, elbows on his knees, eyes forward. He felt the others without looking. Heartbeat rhythms he'd learned to track since creation, breathing patterns that told him who was conserving and who was already burning fuel too fast. They had been warned this would be different. They had not been told how. The bus stopped without warning. Hard brakes. Bodies lurched. The doors hissed open, and the world exploded. Floodlights ignited all at once, white and brutal, flattening depth perception and turning every movement into a silhouette. Sirens wailed. Not alarms, not emergencies, just noise engineered to overwhelm. Gravel crunched as boots hit ground at speed. "Off the bus! Move! Move! Move!" The voices were not loud by accident. They were calibrated, cutting through fatigue, adrenaline, and pride alike. Ranger instructors poured into the kill zone between buses like an assault element. Tan berets low, eyes flat, movements economical. The wolves reacted instantly. Too instantly. They flowed off the buses with predatory efficiency. Fast, clean, coordinated. And immediately paid for it. "Freeze!" The word was quiet. It landed heavier than the shouting. A kill hat slammed his palm into the bus frame inches from Kael's head. The metal rang like a bell. Kael's body tensed, every instinct screaming threat response, dominance, retaliation. But he locked it down. The senior ranger instructor stepped forward slowly, hands clasped behind his back. He did not raise his voice. "You," he said, pointing at Kael. "You think you moved early because you're disciplined." Kael said nothing. "You moved early because you didn't wait." He leaned in just enough for Kael to smell coffee and sweat. That's not initiative. That's disobedience. Kael felt it then. Not anger, not fear, but something colder. Relevance draining away. The wolves were shoved into formation. Not aligned. Not symmetrical. Our eyes disrupted spacing deliberately, boots kicking heels out, hands correcting shoulders too forcefully to be instructional, Precision was being denied on purpose. "Ranger students," the senior RI said, voice even, "welcome to Darby Phase." He let the words sit. "You are not here because you're elite." A pause. "You are here because you might be useful." No one spoke. "Everything you think you are," he continued, "is irrelevant until proven again. From scratch." That was the first lie. They were not starting from scratch. They were starting below zero. There was no orientation, no explanation. They were marched immediately. Rucks were issued on the move. Standard issue, standard weight, no accommodations. Each wolf received the same load as the human candidates, interspersed among them. No one acknowledged the disparity in size or strength. Joran Pike adjusted his straps automatically, irritation flickering behind his eyes. He could carry twice this without breathing hard, 3 times if necessary. The pace increased. 5 miles, then 8, then 12. No cadence, no rhythm, just movement, through pine forest, across red clay trails that sucked at boots and punished ankles. The humidity turned sweat into a second skin. Heat built, trapped. A ranger instructor walked backward in front of the formation, eyes scanning like a weapons system. "You heal fast," he said, conversationally. "You see better. You run longer." He smiled without warmth. None of that means anything here. By the time they reached the patrol base, daylight had fully broken. Birds were loud, insects relentless. The wolves expected a pause. They did not get one. Drop rucks, dig, fighting positions, immediately. No food, no rest, no instructions beyond the order itself. Nyra Voss knelt in the dirt, e-tool biting into clay that resisted every stroke. Her fingers burned. Her senses catalogued everything: the lack of cover, the poor fields of fire, the wrong elevation. Every instinct told her this position would get someone killed. She did not move. A ranger instructor watched her for a long moment. "Why didn't you shift your position?" he asked. Nyra kept her eyes on the hole. "I was not instructed to." The RI nodded once. "Correct." Then he crushed the half-finished position with his boot. "Start over." No anger, no explanation, just authority. No advantage. By mid-morning, the rules were issued. No shifts, no partial transformations, no enhanced sensory use, unless explicitly authorized. Violations would not result in recycling. They would result in removal. Not from the phase, from the program. The meaning was clear. This was not training designed to optimize them. It was training designed to expose what remained when optimization was stripped away. Peer evaluations followed before noon. Each wolf received a card. Rank your squad. Strengths, weaknesses. Would you follow them when exhausted? The pack bond strained. Edric Vale stared at the card longer than necessary. Ranking his own kind felt wrong, like mapping fracture points in bone, a ranger instructor noticed. "Problem?" "No," Edric said. "Good," the RI replied, "because loyalty that ignores reality kills people." The first night they didn't sleep. They rehearsed patrols instead. Troop leading procedures explained once, then demanded flawlessly under fading light. Kael was assigned squad leader for the first movement. His plan was clean, efficient, minimal wasted motion. Too clean. During execution, he skipped a step. Not from ignorance, from instinct. The patrol was halted instantly. "What did you skip?" the RI asked. Kael answered without hesitation. The RI leaned in. "You knew better," he said quietly. "That makes it worse." Kael was relieved on the spot. No yelling, no spectacle, just removal. The wolves felt it ripple through them. Not because Kael failed, but because failure was treated as expected. Correction was the only currency here. By dawn they were wet, hungry, and carrying sleep debt that even accelerated. healing could not fully erase. They were no longer Marines. They were not yet Rangers. They were something far more dangerous now. Students with no advantages left, and Darby phase had only begun. The Darby Queen. The Darby Queen waited in the early morning haze, like something half forgotten and deliberately cruel. It did not announce itself with grandeur. There were no banners, no symbols, no ceremony. Just timber, steel, rope, mud, and red Georgia dirt, arranged with an intelligence that understood failure intimately. More than 20 obstacles stretched across a single mile, walls slick with moisture, beams narrow enough to punish confidence, rope climbs that burned forearms already depleted, crawls that forced faces into the earth. The wolves studied it in silence. This was not unfamiliar terrain. They had trained through worse, faster, harder, deadlier. But this place did not feel designed to break bodies. It felt designed to expose minds. A ranger instructor stepped forward, kill hat black against the pale sky, clipboard tucked under one arm, voice flat, practiced, and unhurried. "This is not a race." The statement landed without reaction. "This course exists to teach you obedience under fatigue. Anyone who treats it like a competition will repeat it." A pause. "Anyone who finishes early will repeat it." That drew attention. Several wolves recalibrated immediately. Speed was not being measured. Something else was. The whistle cut the air. They moved. The first wall came fast. Human ranger candidates struggled immediately, boots slipping, fingers scraping for grip, packs dragging them backward. The wolves cleared it cleanly, muscle memory carrying them upward with practiced efficiency. Too efficient. A ranger instructor's pen moved once on the clipboard. At the balance beam, Bram Noctis trusted momentum instead of contact. His foot slid just enough to be noticed. "Back! Do it again!" No explanation. He complied, jaw set, hands already scraped raw by untreated friction. His body tried to heal the damage automatically, then stalled. The calorie deficit asserted itself. Pain stayed. That was new. At the rope climb, Ciela Thorn transitioned in a single fluid motion, hands to feet to crest, nearly silent, nearly perfect. The whistle screamed. "Reset!" She dropped back down. "You don't adapt the course," the RI shouted. "The course adapts you." Her second attempt was slower, deliberate, ugly. It passed. By the third obstacle, a pattern emerged. Speed invited scrutiny, elegance invited correction, instinct invited punishment. Nyra adjusted first. She shortened her stride, counted steps, matched the pace of the human candidates around her. Where they hesitated, she hesitated. Where they checked hand placement, she checked twice. A kill hat noticed. "Why are you slowing down?" Nyra answered without looking up. "Because speed isn't the requirement." The instructor studied her for a moment, then nodded once. "Don't get clever," he said. "Get correct." Behind her, others were slower to learn. Joran Pike misjudged the depth of the mud pit. His weight shifted forward. Packer, dragging him down until brown water climbed his waist. A low sound escaped him. Pure reflex. The ranger instructor was instantly there. "Check yourself." Joran stopped, forced the sound down. Straightened. "Yes, Sergeant." The instructor leaned close, voice lowered but sharper. "You are not hunting. You are being watched." Joran nodded once and moved on. Soaked, heavier, colder. That sentence stayed with him longer than the mud. By halfway, the wolves were no longer grouped. They were spread across the course, some deliberately slow, others still wrestling instinct. The low crawl forced faces into the dirt, wire-scraping packs, mud-filling sleeves and boots. Forearms burned. Shoulders screamed, breath shortened. This was where the course began to bite back. One human candidate vomited near the rope traverse and was ordered to continue without pause. Another stumbled on the beam and repeated it 3 times. The wolves watched, learned. They adjusted posture, slowed, transitions, accepted inefficiency. Still, they made their second collective mistake at the final obstacle. They finished together, not fast, but clean, silent, unified. The whistle shrieked. All wolves. Penalty loop. No explanation followed. Sandbags were dropped at their feet. A full additional mile. Uphill, loaded. Kael stepped forward and lifted the first bag without comment. Others followed, taking weight, falling into line. This time, no one questioned leadership. They ran. Breathing synchronized. Pace restrained. No wasted motion, not predators. Students. At the end, they were formed up in the dirt, sweat-streaking faces, uniforms soaked, hands shaking from fatigue and restraint. The senior ranger instructor walked the line slowly. "You came here thinking strength would separate you," he said. "It doesn't." He tapped the clipboard. "This course exists to see whether you can obey instructions that contradict who you think you are." He stopped in front of Kael. "Today your instincts failed." A pause. "So did your leadership." Kael met his gaze without flinching. "Yes, Sergeant." The RI studied him, then nodded once. "That answer is why you're still here." They were given 12 minutes, hydration only, no food, no rest beyond standing still. Then they stepped off again, into troop leading procedures, patrol preparation, and another night without sleep. As they moved out, the forest swallowed them whole. The Darby Queen had taken something essential: speed, pride, assumption. What remained was slower, quieter, sharper, and Darby phase was far from finished. Hunger did not arrive all at once. It crept in the way mold does, quiet, patient, inevitable. By the 3rd day, the wolves had learned the rhythm of Darby: movement without rest, instruction without comfort, correction without emotion. They had also learned that food was no longer nourishment. It was leverage. 2 MREs per day, issued without ceremony, consumed under time pressure. Sometimes interrupted halfway through by a shouted command that forced them to stand, reseal, and move on. Caldus Reeve tore open a packet of crackers during a 5-minute halt and felt something twist behind his ribs. Not pain, not weakness, but calculation. How much could he eat before the whistle? He forced himself to stop halfway. That restraint hurt more than the hunger. By day 4, the wolves noticed something unsettling. Their bodies still healed, just not completely. Small cuts closed but stayed tender. Bruises faded slower. Muscles that should have rebounded overnight remained heavy, thick with lactic ache. Edric Vale ran his thumb over a split knuckle as they moved through scrub pine, flexing his hand slowly. Calories, he realized. The magic was there. The biology was there. The fuel was not. Ranger instructors did not acknowledge it. They didn't need to. The lesson was working exactly as designed. You cannot regenerate what you cannot feed. Sleep was reduced to fragments. 20 minutes here, 40 there. Sometimes nothing at all. They learned to dream while standing. Thane Core nearly stepped off a trail at dusk, misjudging depth where shadows pooled too thickly. Varric Stone caught his shoulder without comment and set him back on line. No thanks, no nod, just correction. Nyra began counting breaths instead of minutes. It helped her stay present. Saela Thorn stopped counting entirely. She relied on pain instead, digging fingernails into her palm whenever her focus drifted. The ranger instructors watched everything. "Who's hallucinating?" one asked casually during a map check. No one answered. That wasn't optional. Joran Pike raised a hand. Peripheral movement, he said. Not real. The RI nodded. Good. You're still self-aware. A pause. For now. Patrols blurred together. Recon, movement to contact. Raid rehearsals conducted at a pace that made excellence impossible and failure unavoidable. Kael was assigned assistant squad leader this time. He followed procedure exactly. Still, something went wrong. A missed rally point, a delayed security establishment, small errors. But Darby magnified small things. The patrol was failed. The ranger instructor didn't raise his voice. You had the knowledge, he said. Why didn't you act? Kael hesitated. Because I wasn't in command. The RI's eyes hardened. Leadership doesn't wait for permission, he said, but it does respect structure. Learn the difference. That night, Kael sat awake, back against a tree, ruck still on. The lesson gnawed at him. Strength wasn't the problem. Initiative wasn't either. Timing was. Peer evaluations came again. This time they cut deeper. Names shifted positions. Strengths were questioned. Weaknesses documented. Saela received her first negative mark. Over-aggressive. She read it twice, then folded the card and put it away. Later, during a movement halt, she slowed deliberately, matching the pace of the human ranger in front of her. When he stumbled, she resisted the urge to catch him, waited until he regained balance on his own. A ranger instructor noticed. He said nothing. That was worse. By the end of the week, the wolves understood the lie. They could endure more than humans. But endurance alone didn't pass Darby. Darby rewarded those who could think while depleted, decide while uncertain, and lead while invisible. It punished those who believed suffering was a currency. One night, as rain soaked through ponchos and pooled in fighting holes, Nyra Ashen whispered into the dark. This is harder than the crucible. Kael answered without looking at her. Because the crucible wanted us to finish. A pause. Darby wants us to fail correctly. Dawn came again. No relief followed. They stepped off once more, into TLP instruction, leadership rotation, and graded patrols that would decide who stayed and who did not. The wolves were still here, but now they were tired enough to make real mistakes, and Darby Faze was ready to collect them. Hunger did not announce itself. It did not arrive as pain or weakness or desperation. It arrived as distraction. On the first days of Darby Faze, the wolves still felt strong. Their bodies responded. Their movements were precise. Muscles obeyed commands without hesitation. The memory of Marine Corps training still lived in their posture, their breathing, the way they adjusted their gear without thinking. They believed, quietly, confidently, that they had already paid the price. Darby existed to strip that belief away. The first MRAs were issued without comment. No briefing, no warning, no explanation. 2 per day. That was it. At first it seemed manageable, even generous. The wolves had trained on less before, on empty stomachs, on controlled deprivation. But Darby was not about scarcity. It was about timing. Meals were issued when they were exhausted, interrupted when they were halfway through, confiscated when mistakes were made elsewhere. Sometimes eaten cold, sometimes not eaten at all. Food stopped being fuel. It became leverage. Caldus Reeve noticed it first, not because he was hungrier than the others, but because he watched patterns. A patrol failed, dinner delayed, a formation sloppy, breakfast shortened, an individual mistake. Everyone paid. The wolves began to eat faster, then slower, then selectively. Protein first, then calories, then whatever could be swallowed before the next command. And still, it was never enough. By day 3, the difference became measurable. Muscles recovered slower. Small injuries lingered. Bruises stayed dark and tender long after they should have faded. The wolves were healing, but incompletely. Their enhanced physiology was still working, but Darby had found the margin. Regeneration required fuel. Without it, even monsters paid interest. Nyra felt it during a night movement, her thighs burning longer than they should have. Breath coming a fraction, too, shallow on inclines she would normally ignore. She adjusted her pace, not out of weakness, but calculation. This wasn't about surviving the movement. It was about surviving the next decision. Sleep vanished even faster than food. At first it was shortened, then fragmented, then weaponized. 20 minutes of rest after 12 hours of movement. 30 minutes interrupted by a leadership change. An hour promised, then revoked because someone failed to secure a sector. Eventually, sleep became accidental. Standing in formation, kneeling during a briefing, leaning against a ruck during map checks. The wolves learned to micro-sleep. Seconds at a time, eyes open, bodies upright. They also learned its cost. Reaction time slowed, peripheral vision blurred, depth perception failed at the edges. Joran Pike nearly missed a hand signal during a dusk patrol, not because he didn't know it, but because his brain processed it half a second late. Half a second mattered. Ranger instructors noticed everything. They did not intervene. By the fourth night, hallucinations began. Not vivid, not dramatic, but subtle. Movement where there was none. Sounds that didn't repeat. Smells remembered rather than present. A ranger instructor asked, casually during a halt, "Who's seeing things?" Silence. "That's not optional." Joran raised his hand. "Peripheral movement," he said. "Shadow displacement. I'm tracking it." The RI nodded. "Good. You're still self-aware." A pause. "For now." The wolves understood the warning. When you stop questioning your perception, Darby owns you. The patrols intensified. Recon. Ambush. Movement to contact. Raid rehearsals. Executed back-to-back with minimal planning time and zero recovery. Doctrine mattered, but only if it survived exhaustion. Troop-leading procedures were enforced with precision, then compressed until mistakes were inevitable. Kael was assigned assistant squad leader during a movement exercise that should have been routine. He followed the checklist perfectly. Still, the patrol failed. A security element established seconds later, a rally point slightly off azimuth, a missed opportunity to correct a developing error. The ranger instructor did not shout. "You knew what to do," he said calmly. "Why didn't you act?" Kael answered honestly. "I wasn't in command." The RI stepped closer. "Leadership doesn't wait for rank," he said, "but it also doesn't ignore structure. Learn the difference." That night, Kael did not sleep. Not because he wasn't allowed, because the lesson was still unfolding. Peer evaluations came mid-phase, no ceremony, just paper, names, numbers, observations. The wolves had faced judgment before, from instructors, commanders, enemies. This was different. This was internal. Elowen Cade received her first negative remark. "To violent in execution." She read it twice. No context, no explanation. Just the accusation. It wasn't wrong, but it wasn't complete either. She folded the paper and put it away. The next patrol she slowed deliberately, held position longer than instinct demanded. Let a human ranger correct his own footing instead of stepping in. A ranger instructor observed. He said nothing, which meant he had noticed. By the end of the week, the wolves understood the central deception. Darby did not care how much pain they could take. Pain was cheap. Darby cared about decision-making under depletion, about whether leadership emerged when authority blurred. about whether discipline survived hunger, about whether arrogance collapsed under fatigue. Endurance alone failed here. Those who treated suffering like a badge were quietly removed. Those who adapted, who rationed effort, delegated instinctively, and protected cognitive bandwidth, survived. Nyra Ashen whispered one night as rain soaked through ponchos and pooled in fighting holes. "This is harder than the crucible," Kael answered without turning his head. "Because the crucible wanted us to finish." A pause. "Darby wants us to fail correctly." By now the wolves no longer moved like individuals. They moved like a system, without discussion, without signals. Someone always caught the mistake before it cascaded. Someone always filled the gap, not because of loyalty, because inefficiency cost calories, and calories were life. They were still strong, but now they were precise, still dangerous, but now disciplined. Darby had not broken them. It had stripped them down to what remained when strength ran out, and what remained was enough. Dawn came again. No relief followed. They stepped off into the next stage, where doctrine would be compressed further, leadership rotated faster, and troop-leading procedures would fracture under pressure. Darby was done testing endurance. Now it would test command. "Figure it out," the RI said, already stepping back. Stopwatch running. The wolves learned quickly that TLPs were no longer sequential. They overlapped, collided, competed, planning while moving, issuing fragmentary warning orders mid-stride, adjusting routes while navigating in the dark with a half-working compass and terrain that refused to match the map. The wolves had the advantage of heightened senses, but Darby neutralized that by exhaustion. Smell blurred, hearing dulled, even enhanced vision struggled under constant sleep deprivation. Strength didn't help when the mind lagged behind the mission. The first real fracture came during a night patrol. One wolf, newly assigned squad leader, built a technically flawless plan. Terrain analysis was precise, fields of fire well considered, timelines tight but achievable. He briefed confidently, voice steady, posture controlled. The squad stepped off and immediately began to drift. The wolf had planned alone. Tasks weren't delegated clearly. Subordinate leaders hadn't rehearsed contingencies. When a simulated enemy element appeared early, unexpected but not unrealistic, the squad hesitated. Seconds stretched. No one wanted to overstep. The wolf issued 3 conflicting commands in under 10 seconds. The patrol stalled. The RI didn't intervene until the damage was done. Freeze. Silence. Then the notebook came out. Failure logged. Later, no yelling came, only a quiet observation delivered with surgical calm. You knew the steps. You didn't trust your people. That cut deeper than any scream. By day 10, exhaustion became a character of its own. Sleep came in fragments. 10 minutes here, 15 there, often interrupted by movement orders or surprise inspections. Wolves lay down already knowing they'd be awake again before their bodies settled. Decision-making slowed. Small mistakes crept in. A missed terrain feature. A poorly marked rally point. A hand signal misunderstood in the dark. Ranger instructors watched everything. They watched who corrected mistakes immediately and who hoped no one noticed. They watched who stepped up quietly when a leader faltered, and who stayed silent to avoid responsibility. The wolves discovered something uncomfortable. Darby punished passivity as harshly as incompetence. Leadership was not about rank or assignment. It was about action when clarity evaporated. The most dangerous moments weren't during patrols, they were in the gaps, those minutes between orders, between movement and rest. When ranger instructors deliberately vanished into the trees, radios silent, eyes unseen. That was when fractures appeared, arguments over route selection, tension over pace, quiet resentment when one wolf seemed tireless while others struggled. The wolves had learned restraint, but Darby pressed on it hard. One wolf noticed a human teammate failing navigation silently, pride preventing him from asking for help. Correcting him publicly would undermine authority. Ignoring it risked mission failure. The wolf waited. Too long. The patrol drifted off azimuth. Another failure. Darby didn't reward politeness. It rewarded intervention at the right moment. Peer evaluations arrived without ceremony. Slips of paper. No discussion. No defense. Rank your teammates. Leadership. Trust. Reliability. For the wolves, this was where restraint became visible and suspect. They were strong, consistent, rarely emotional, and that unsettled people. One evaluation read, would follow in contact, hard to connect with. Another, feels distant, like he's already somewhere else. Darby noticed patterns. Leadership wasn't just competence, it was presence. If people wouldn't speak up around you, you weren't leading. You were commanding in a vacuum. The defining moment came during a daylight patrol under brutal heat. The assigned patrol leader froze under pressure. His plan unraveled. Subordinates waited. Time slipped. Wolves saw it unfolding. This time, one of them stepped in. Calm, measured, without raising his voice. He didn't seize control. He anchored it, issued a correction, clarified intent, redirected movement. The patrol stabilized. Still failed overall, but it didn't collapse. When the RI halted the lane, he looked at the group and asked, who was in charge when it went wrong? Silence. Then the wolf stepped forward. I was. No justification. No explanation. Ownership. The RI nodded once and wrote. That mattered. By now, the wolves understood the truth of Ranger School. Darby wasn't testing if you knew doctrine. It was testing who you became when doctrine stopped fitting cleanly. Ego failed here. Strength failed here. Silence failed here. Only adaptive leadership survived. The wolves weren't dominant. They weren't invisible. They were learning how to be seen without being feared. Darby didn't approve of them yet, but it was watching closely. They had stopped trying to be perfect. They had started trying to be responsible, and that was enough, for now. Where doctrine collides with exhaustion and command is revealed when no one is watching. By the time troop-leading procedures became the focus, the wolves were already hollowed out. Not broken. Darby didn't break people that early, but thinned, stripped of surplus thought, surplus patience, surplus pride. The physical pain had become background noise, calves permanently tight, shoulders raw under ruck straps, fingers swollen from constant weapon handling. What remained was decision-making under a permanent low-grade ache. That was the point. Troop-leading procedures, TLPs, were not new to them. Every wolf had memorized the steps long before arriving at Fort Moore. Issue the warning order, make a tentative plan, initiate movement, conduct reconnaissance, complete the plan, issue the order, supervise, and refine. On paper, it was clean. In Darby, it was a trap. Orders now came incomplete by design. Ranger instructors gathered the platoon in a loose horseshoe formation at dusk, red lens lights flickering against their maps. The RI delivering the order spoke calmly, almost casually, as if he weren't about to detonate the next 12 hours of suffering. Enemy size, unknown. Friendly support, unavailable. Timeline, compressed. Terrain, poorly defined. Questions were allowed, but answers were vague. When the margin for error shrinks to nothing, and leadership becomes the only thing holding the future together. By the time graded patrols began, the wolves were no longer thinking in days. They were thinking in movements, in meters, in heartbeats between halts. Darby had stripped time down to its essentials, and what remained was pressure, constant, invisible, and merciless. No one announced the shift. There was no ceremony marking the moment when training ended and judgment began. The ranger instructors simply stopped intervening. They stopped correcting posture, stopped snapping at sloppy intervals, stopped reminding leaders of things they should already know. The silence was immediate and terrifying. The wolves felt it like a temperature change. This was no longer about becoming rangers. This was about proving the impossible premise behind their existence, that a non-human unit could plan, lead, and execute independent small unit operations under the same doctrinal constraints as human soldiers, while exhausted, hungry, and under scrutiny. The wolves didn't know the bureaucratic reality, but they felt the truth in their bones. If they failed here, the program would not be reworked. It would be erased. They weren't alone anymore. They could sense it. Not by smell, Darby had trained that out of them, but by behavior. The RIs stood slightly farther back. Observers lingered longer. Clipboards appeared more often. Human eyes evaluating more than performance, evaluating viability. Every patrol now carried an unspoken question. Can we trust them when no one is watching? The wolves felt the answer forming, patrol by patrol. The first graded patrol stepped off before dawn. Cold air, wet ground, packs heavy with everything except calories. The wolf, acting as squad leader, felt the responsibility settle over him like a physical weight. Not fear, something worse, accountability. He knew the doctrine. He had rehearsed the orders until they were carved into memory. He knew what right looked like. And yet, something felt wrong as they moved. The terrain whispered things the map did not. A subtle slope mismatch, tree spacing that suggested elevation change not marked on paper. Instinct urged him to halt, reassess. Doctrine warned him about hesitation. He split the difference. That half measure cost them. They reached the ORP on time, but wrong. 300 meters short, not enough to scream failure, enough to poison the plan. The recon element confirmed it too late. The timeline collapsed. Enemy contact triggered early. The patrol reacted correctly. Fire and maneuver executed cleanly. But the mission was already compromised. The RI froze the lane. No yelling, no commentary, just a raised fist and the quiet order. Secure weapons. The wolves were walked out in silence. The wolf in charge felt it then. Not humiliation, but something colder. A note had been made. The next patrol was different. Leadership rotated. The wolves adjusted. They were sharper, slower, more careful, and still pressure found them. A wolf delayed a fragmentary order by seconds, trying to perfect phrasing. Those seconds mattered. A subordinate misread intent. Security lagged. The patrol recovered, tactically sound, but doctrinally imperfect. Again, the lane ended early. Again, silence. The wolves began to understand the real attrition of Darby. Not bodies, confidence. Every patrol chipped away at certainty. Were they being evaluated as rangers or as an experiment waiting to fail? Midway through graded patrols, the stress finally surfaced, not in combat, in planning. One night, during a patrol brief, tension flickered across the wolves like static. A suggestion offered, another dismissed. Voices remained low, disciplined, but the air tightened. The wolf in charge felt the moment stretch, wanted to dominate. Doctrine demanded control. He chose control. He listened. Plan improved. The patrol succeeded. Not flawlessly, but together. That moment mattered more than any successful ambush, because the observers noticed. The closest the program came to ending did not involve gunfire. It involved authority. During a night patrol, terrain and fatigue conspired against clarity. Visibility dropped. Comms were degraded intentionally. The wolf in charge issued a command that was correct, but incomplete. A subordinate executed it literally. The patrol exposed a flank. The OPFOR exploited it. Chaos followed. Controlled chaos, but chaos nonetheless. The RI halted the lane immediately. Observers stepped forward. This was not about tactics. This was about command precision under exhaustion. The wolves felt it instantly. This wasn't a failed patrol. This was a test of trust, and it had nearly snapped. That night, no one spoke. Not out of fear, but because they all understood how close they'd come. After that patrol, something fundamental changed. The wolves stopped thinking like individuals being evaluated. They began thinking like a single organism being judged as a whole. Leadership briefs became shorter, not because of fatigue, but because of trust. Orders were issued with intent clearly stated. Subordinates asked clarifying questions without fear. Instinct stopped competing with doctrine. It served it. The wolves were no longer suppressing what they were. They were disciplining it. The final graded patrol began in rain. Cold, soaking, relentless. The wolves moved without urgency, but without waste. Every halt purposeful. Every sector covered. Every adjustment communicated cleanly. When contact occurred, it was textbook. No theatrics. No hesitation. The RI watched. Did not intervene. Did not stop the lane. The patrol completed the mission. When it ended, the wolves stood in the rain, waiting. The RI made a mark. That was it. There was no announcement, no congratulatory speech, just a quiet shift in posture from the instructors, less predatory, more professional. The wolves had not impressed Darby. They had satisfied it. And that was enough. The program survived Phase 1. Barely. Darby did not take wolves. It took illusions. The illusion that strength was enough. That instinct alone was superior. That leadership meant dominance. What it left behind was something rarer. A unit capable of restraint under existential pressure. A pack that understood failure wouldn't come with explosions, but with paperwork, silence, and erasure. They left Darby knowing one final truth. They were no longer proving they could fight. They were proving they deserved to exist. Ahead waited the mountains, where mistakes would be punished by gravity, and trust would be tested vertically.